However, we did need to prepare for the risk. I'm going to make some progress and come to the specific questions. Yeah. We did need to prepare for the risk that local services may be unable to fully respond to significant pressures caused by COVID-19. Serious staff absences, coupled with an increase in demand for services, could lead to the most vulnerable children being put at risk if services struggle to cope with the requirements of legislation. Some of the changes provide for the ability to divert from established timescales for a limited number of activities or to cater for situations where staff absences where there may be staff absences or a need to reduce personal contact. For example, it may not be appropriate for a social worker to physically visit a looked-after child if COVID is present or if his household is self-isolating. Some changes are designed to help ensure that there are minimal delays in the adoption or fostering process. For example, in order to make sure that we have enough foster carers available at a time when potential need has increased, we've given flexibility on who could be a temporary foster carer, while still requiring that carers must be properly assessed for this vital role. Other changes allow local authorities more time to respond to formal reports, such as those from Ofsted inspections. The flexibilities were developed rapidly and they needed to be so the scope for formal consultation was more limited than normal, and it was necessary to forego the standard 21-day rule for them coming into force. But the views on a wide range of organisation did influence the regulations that were laid before the House, and I do welcome the opportunity to discuss them tonight. It is important to be clear exactly what those flexibilities are, because otherwise young people will be unduly concerned. First of all, the member opposite has suggested that short break placements for children are now too long and there won't be any requirements on visits and care plans. But actually, the annual limit of 75 days remains in any 1 year, but we've removed the restriction on no single placement being later than 17 days, simply so that children do not have to move between homes as frequently, and I'm sure that she will understand that. The Right Honourable Lady opposite suggested that social workers no longer need to visit children living in care. That's simply not the case. Statutory timescales remain in place. Social workers always must endeavour to meet those timetables, and in the small number of cases where they cannot meet them, such as due to sickness or self-isolation, then they must be able to demonstrate that they can meet them and why the temporary amendment can be used. It is not the case that children's homes can deprive a child of his or her liberty. That decision can only be made by a public health officer who has the power to impose proportionate requirements, including screening and isolation, if any individual has a suspected or confirmed case of coronavirus. And that decision must always be kept under review and must take account of the child's well-being. There's a suggestion that children could be placed with emergency foster carers for too long and without scrutiny. But actually, there will continue to be the same scrutiny of emergency foster carers. The member for East Worthing and Shoreham asked about decisions to decisions on placing a child in care outside of his local area. And by the way, I thank him for his invitation to meet with his APPG, and I would be delighted to do that. Actually, any decision to place a child with a non-connected person would still be subject to strict and intensive assessment by the local authority of their suitability, their background and their circumstances. This flexibility is only available in cases where additional scrutiny by a nominated officer would delay a child from being placed with appropriate and approved carer. He also raised the important issue of serious safeguarding cases. No changes have been made to primary legislation that requires local authorities to investigate suspected cases of the risk of significant harm, or local authorities' powers to make applications for emergency protection orders or applications for care protection orders. He and the member for Birmingham Selly asked why there were differences to other parts of the UK. And the structures and approaches differ across each part of the UK, and so will the pressures that are felt. We in the Department for Education speak to providers and local authorities in England, and these changes are our response to what we have been told. And other countries will have spoken to their own local areas and will take actions accordingly. Regarding the Children's Commissioner, the Children's Commissioner has a very important job to speak for children, and it is right that she does so. We agree on the importance of protecting vulnerable children, and indeed I speak to her regularly. But on this matter, we disagree. And I set out clear responses to the points she made in an article to The Guardian in a point-by-point statement published on the Department's website. And I would suggest that those members who have quoted her tonight also look at the detailed responses I have made, because we have worked to address many of her concerns in the guidance that we have published for local authorities, and we're continuing to engage with her about how we can ensure our guidance is clear. Madam Deputy Speaker, a really important point. These flexibilities should only be used when absolutely necessary and in the interest of the child, because the child's interest must come first. If there is no pressing need to use them, they should not be used. The flexibilities must be approved at chief officer level in local authorities or top-tier management in other organisations, and the decisions for its being used must be recorded. Ofsted will take note of any usage, and Ofsted stand ready to take action. Indeed, Ofsted are taking action even at this time. Ofsted has taken action to suspend 17 children's homes or stop them taking children. Monitoring is important. We've been gathering information regularly on which the regulations are being used and why. We're holding a monthly survey of local authorities. We are working with key organisations, including children's charities and provider representatives, to seek feedback on how the regulations are being used and the effect on children. I'm glad to report that they are being used infrequently. The flexibility most likely to be used is that one that allows medical reports to be considered at a later date of an adoption process, thus minimising the delays in approving adopters and allowing for those children to move on into that new forever family. The changes will expire on the 25th of September. There is no plan to extend them. If there is a need for further flexibility, this will be on a case-by-case basis of discussing with stakeholders and subject to full parliamentary process. Those regulation changes are temporary. They are not permanent. I'm committed to keep a close eye on the situation and will report back to Parliament before the summer recess. Mr. Speaker, the Government is absolutely committed to supporting vulnerable children and ensuring that they are properly safeguarded. We have demonstrated this through the initiatives I've outlined today, and supporting vulnerable children will continue to be my #1 priority, the #1 priority of the Department for Education and the #1 priority of this Government during this time. Thank you.